Today's speaker in the La Trobe Innovation Series is Mr Craig Scroggie, CEO of NextDec Australia, Australia's leading data centre as a service provider. Craig's presentation is entitled Welcome to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Craig's presentation is insightful in the way that he challenges us to think about and imagine the future through the lens of ever-expanding data analytic possibilities. Craig grounds his presentation in four major theoretical influences: Moore's law, where the number of transistors per square inch on integrated circuits will double every year; Schumpeter economics and the notion of creative destruction; and books like The Lean Startup by Eric Ries and The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab. Data, according to Craig, is the electricity of our age, and the amount is doubling every 2 years. Yet we only analyse less than 1% of the current global data. Global internet traffic will nearly triple over the next 5 years, driving billions of dollars of investment in the construction of new data centres and communication networks to enable our digital lives. With the Internet of Things, we're entering a whole new area of technology: machine learning, self-driving cars, drones, 3D printed body parts, robotics and artificial intelligence. He argues we'll have new opportunities for solutions to challenges as digital disruption affects areas such as medical research, sustainability, energy, education and transport. Opportunities will also emerge from the convergence of technologies over time. His advice for startups and entrepreneurs is to develop products and services using lean methods and platforms aimed at the mobile market, not desktop computing. Please enjoy Craig Scroggie's presentation. Now, we apologise for some of the poor quality of the lighting in this video, but it was filmed in a night session. However, the main messages remain very clear from Craig's presentation.
All right. I'm going to check with my friend up the back there, make sure he's happy. Yeah, okay, he's smiling, good. So, it's great not to be standing between you and a drink. I think Kate had the hardest position in the program, which is always the last presenter of the day before a drink, so hopefully everybody's had the opportunity to get a refreshment and relax a little bit. My time with the university, I've been involved with the university and the business school for almost 10 years and had the great pleasure to support Paul in his time as the head of the school, and also be involved in a lot of great developments that the university has led over the years, including obviously the development of the city campus, which is a great achievement for the school. But one thing that I had come to appreciate over time is how important the regional corridor is for the school out here and how important supporting business and the community is. And when Paul and Mark had asked me if I would share some thoughts on innovation and building a company, it was my great pleasure to be able to do that and spend some time with you. I'm not going to really talk about my organisation or our journey, but both Mark and Paul did mention it, and suffice to say that when we founded NextDC in 2010, we were a startup. I remember very, very clearly at the beginning we had 4 milk crates and a card table. That was the first board meeting I went to. And we raised a little bit of money. We had a founder who supported most of the capital requirements of the business, but we listed on the ASX as a startup with no customers, nothing, no business model. Just a great idea and a very, very strong belief that what we knew about the industry and this massive transformational change that was coming would really change the way we all work and live today. And that ultimately would be data, which is the electricity of our age. So when you fast forward now, obviously from December 2010 when the company was founded to today, we are the 120th largest public listed company in Australia, $1.4 billion market cap. Not many companies get to turn over more than 100 million a year, and in 5 years of operation we surpassed that last year and well on the track to becoming a $5 billion business. So I've had, I guess, a lot of challenging experiences with building a company, experimenting with innovation, and I wanted to share some of the thoughts ultimately that were most important to me on the journey that we've been on as we've built a company essentially that became a new age business rather than an old age one. When you consider that in the last 2 years we have created more information than the amount of information that existed in the entire history of the human race, something has to have changed. So ultimately, what is it that has driven that change? Now, does anyone know what that model phone is or what year it was released? There's a prize. There's a prize.
Nokia 3680?
Oh, it's a Nokia. Yep, you got that part. Keep going. Try again.
6210.
Okay. All right. You all lose. It is the 5150. Sorry, the 5110, and it was released in 1998. Now, this was a phone that fundamentally changed the telecommunications industry. And it did because when we started to see the potential for data, that potential really started in text messaging, not voice. And that was the beginning, ultimately, of what changed the way we use technology today. And in that last 2 years, where we've created more information than all of humankind history, information has become the most valuable resource in the world. Not oil, it's data. And this is essentially what Professor Klaus Schwab calls the fourth industrial revolution. As we have grown up through society, these industrial revolutions have fundamentally changed the way we work. And we again are facing some material fundamental changes in the context of workforce makeup. But the key message I would give you is that no one should panic, because in every transformation through every industrial revolution, and Kate made this point earlier, old industries give way to new ones. But to demonstrate how powerful the era that we are moving into today, if you look at the total amount of computing capacity available to us globally, worldwide, in exaflops, you will see that from 1980 to the early, just past 2000, we had a very, very small doubling. It was 0.01, and it was doubling, and until we got to large numbers, you didn't see a massive change. And now there's a reason for it. But what has happened in the last 10 years is we've had huge transformational change, not only in costs going down, but the total amount of available computing capacity going up materially. So Kate obviously had spent most of her career at Intel, but this is a really, really important foundational piece of history in the IT industry. And in 1967, Gordon Moore, who was the co-founder of Intel with Andy Grove, wrote a white paper. And in that white paper, he created a log scale. And that log scale showed that the number of transistors would double every 18 to 24 months. So that price performance doubling of integrated circuits in 1967, and he believed firmly that that was going to drive transformational change, but they weren't sure exactly in what industry. Now, Moore's law essentially proved that not over 10 years or 20 years, over 50 years, that he was right in 1967. Not only was Gordon Moore right, but he actually demonstrated that Moore's law had been true for 110 years, not 50. And there were 4 paradigms of computing before Moore's law. Now, the best place to see it in action is to look at something that all of us are familiar with as consumers, and that's the iPhone. So the first iPhone that was released 10 years ago, 1 gig, and it was about $12 to $14.99. 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128. And then a year ago we got the iPhone 7 at $256. Same price, massive shift in the total amount of computational capacity. So not only have we got more computing power in our pocket today than what NASA had when we put a man on the moon, something fundamental has changed. Now, I grew up as a musician, so playing music, being in a band. When I used to go to concerts as a kid, people used to watch the band. And if you wanted light, you used a lighter. And today, and I'm very lucky to have my family here because they're on holidays. And it wasn't long ago I went to a music concert with the family. And when you look around you and you stop and look at all the kids that go and watch music today, they're actually not watching the band. They're filming it, they're live streaming it, they're recording it, but they're not living in the moment and they're not experiencing it. And they're things that are very, very different when you think about how technology has changed the way we live as consumers, but also as creators of content. That content creation change has fundamentally put a dent in the industry. Ray Kurzweil is the head of artificial intelligence at Google. And after Moore's Law, what Ray proved was that obviously Gordon Moore's theory on price performance doubling of integrated circuits had been true for 110 years. And Kurzweil's law essentially is that technology built on technology drives an exponential rate of change. So that has been true for 110 years. So here is Gordon Moore's log scale in 1967, but going backwards to 1900, adding in all of that price performance doubling. So we've got five generations of paradigm shift in computing. Now, what's really important about Kurzweil's law is that in 5 years, if this exponential rate of growth continues to be true, the $1,000 chip that you buy in a computer, so essentially your $1,000 laptop that you buy from Harvey Norman, assuming they're still in business, they may very well not be, but that $1,000 computer at 10 to the 16th, a neurophysiologist will tell you that is the computing capacity, the audio and visual cortex computing capacity of the human brain. So within 5 years, for $1,000, we will be able to buy the computational capacity of the human brain. If the same continues to be true as it has been for the last 110 years, but as the large numbers have got larger and doubling has driven that change, by 2050, you will be able to buy the computational capacity of the human race. So what does it mean? And why is this happening? Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis. So Stephen Kotler wrote a book. Peter Diamandis, the founder of Singularity University, and part of that theory that they produced was essentially Kotler's 6 Ds of exponential technology. And I've got a list of books at the end, so you don't have to write them down if you're interested in some of the things that I've been interested in over time and what drives change and innovation. But essentially, if we use an example, analog to digital. Analog photos, film, we went to digital cameras. In the very early days, digital photography wasn't going to take off. Why would it take off when the company that invented digital photography wouldn't support it? So it was in a period of deception. When the first digital camera was developed in 1976 by a Kodak employee, it was 0.01 megapixels. So it was deceptive. And then for a long time, nothing happened. And then it became disruptive. But it wasn't until 2007, when the first iPhone was released, that the technology dematerialized from the physical digital camera into the phone for the very first time. And when it dematerialized, something extraordinary happened. It demonetized, because now the marginal incremental cost of taking the next photo went to what? Went to zero. And when the marginal incremental cost goes to zero, that's when you get an exponential change. And ultimately then we have the democratization of that technology, because everybody that carries a phone now has access to digital photography. So essentially Professor Joseph Schumpeter's Gale, or what is known as creative destruction. So I like to look back in the context of looking forward. There's no reason why this won't continue to be true, and it may very, very well accelerate. Why? So let's think about Kodak. In 1996, at their height, does anyone know what Kodak's market cap was? 28 billion. Do you know how many employees Kodak had globally? 140,000. One of the most highly respected global brands in the world. Now, I took this photo in Las Vegas just over a year ago at the CES show, and when I went up to the stand and said, "What is Kodak today?" they said, "Oh, we're really interested in this new, emerging, innovative technology." And you know what it was? It's not digital photography. It's disposable film from Instamatic cameras, because it's coming back. And I didn't know it was coming back until my daughter, who's sitting up the back, for her 12th birthday, didn't want a digital camera. She wanted one that she could take a photo of her friends at her birthday and rip the top off that piece of film and say, "Look at that, I've just taken a photo," and it's instantly on paper. Isn't that an amazing innovation? But for those of us that grew up with Polaroids, you know, it's extraordinary to think how massive a disruption that digital photography has been, but ultimately where we've come back to. The thing that is really amazing about Kodak is that they developed digital photography in 1976. Can you imagine if you were the engineer that developed it? Samson, you went into the Kodak board meeting and said, "I've just built a 0.01 megapixel digital camera," and the board of Kodak went, "That's a toy for kids. This digital photography thing, A, it will never take off, and B, we are in the paper and chemicals business. And that is not aligned with what we do. That could disrupt our core business if it took off. So sure, we develop it, but we'll not support it." And in 1997, Kodak, 28 billion market cap. If you fast forward to 2012, Chapter 11, bankrupt. Kodak had 17,000 employees. But you know the extraordinary thing about what happened in 2012 wasn't that Kodak went bankrupt. Wasn't that they missed the innovation opportunity that they owned. It was that this company, Instagram, was sold to Facebook for $1 billion. You know how many employees they had? 13. And then there's books. The thing I love about Amazon from an innovation point of view, and one of the privileges I have in doing what we do today, is to work with these suppliers globally and work with all of them on, when you see how innovative they are and how they work internally, it is ingrained in their culture. The thing I really love about Amazon is that after Jeff Bezos had built the largest book business in the world, they become the largest distributor of books globally. He then decided that they should totally disrupt that business and build a digital book reader. Because being the largest book company in the world wasn't enough. As an organisation, core to their DNA in innovation is lowering the cost of delivering services to their customers. And the way to lower the cost is to remove those elements. So by building the Kindle book reader, they even further democratise the delivery of learning. The thing that's extraordinary about that is that Amazon have sold more digital books in the last 2 years than they shipped physical books in the last decade. And that will double. And then we had music, and it wasn't so much the iPod itself but the platform, and Kate talked about platforms earlier, but the platform that changed the way we consume music. And I think Steve Jobs did a lot of extraordinary things in his career, but this was one of the greatest because the music industry was very, very hard to change. And this has got to be my favourite. And it's my favourite because as a kid I used to love going and getting a video on a Saturday night. That was the thing that we did, and I was very, very fortunate once a week to be able to do that with my family. But if you don't know the story of Netflix, I'll give you the very short version. And most of you would remember what it was like when you hired a video if you forgot for some reason to take it back. Now, in 1997, Reed Hastings, who was the CEO and founder of Netflix, hired the movie Apollo 13. And Reed forgot to return it, not for a day or a week or a month, for 6 weeks. And eventually when it took the video back, the late fee was worth more than the actual cost of buying the movie itself. And he was so pissed off that he stopped what he was doing and he founded Netflix. And at that time when he founded Netflix, that was the beginning. He had a vision. If you think about Blockbuster's business model, their business model was when you go into the store, you get a video, but then you get the whole experience. Popcorn, chocolate, ice cream, and you go home with the equivalent of what you would have had if you could have afforded to take your family to the movies. But Reed believed passionately that eventually the technology would be there to stream video to the home. But whilst it wasn't there, he wanted to try and reduce the cost of it and overcome many of the issues that were key flaws in Blockbuster's business model. So he said, I will mail order people videos. You'll sign up to the club, you'll pay a fee, and I'll send you a video in the mail, and you'll send it back when you finish watching it. Now, only 3 years after Netflix was started, Reed had offered to sell the business to Blockbuster for $50 million. And Blockbuster at the time weren't interested. And once the technology was there to move from mail order into the network distribution, and we've had those advances in the network itself, Netflix took on a life of its own and accelerated, and before you knew it, Blockbuster was out of business. But the primary thing that put Blockbuster out of business is that they made money not from their business model. Do you know what their most profitable item was in the company? Late fees. The core of Blockbuster's business model was founded on the idea that you wouldn't return your video on time. And ultimately, he had a way to undermine that. So Netflix, the thing I love about the story is that Reed said over time, Blockbuster did everything they could to put them out of business. Absolutely everything. And in an interview in Fortune magazine at one point before the end of Blockbuster, Reed said, they have done everything they possibly can to drive us out of business. They've thrown everything at us other than the kitchen sink. And 3 days later, a kitchen sink turned up at Netflix's office, courtesy of Blockbuster. And then, before you know it, chapter 11, they were gone. Strategic choices, when you think about innovation, they have to be painful, because if they're not painful, you think about it, if you're the incumbent, if you run an old world business and you aren't prepared to make big bets, they're not large enough. So I like to think about the companies that had challenges, why they didn't change, what is it that's core to innovation in the context of our DNA. But then when I look at the rate of change, some of the thoughts I wanted to share was, where are we going? So we're in an extraordinary time. There has never been opportunity ever in the history of mankind like there is today. And ultimately it's driven because of this technology built on technology. It's Moore's law moving to Kurzweil's law. And all of the things that you're seeing today, drones, autonomous vehicles, it's the convergence of these technologies, is not the technologies necessarily themselves, but it's the combination of them that is most exciting. So I'm going to touch on a few really quickly. 2.9 billion people connected to the internet, almost 3 billion today, and by 2020 we'll have 6 billion. 6 billion. 3 billion new entrepreneurs coming onto the internet that don't exist today. Imagine what they are going to do. A child in Mumbai has access to the same information that the founders of Google have. And they're not going to do it the same way we did. There'll be no dial-up 9600K board modems. They've got instant access. There's no hard lines. It's all going to be mobile. So when we think about development of technology, everything is built for a mobile experience. And when you think about the number of users that are ultimately going to be accessing technology from a mobile point of view, don't bother building anything for the desktop. If you're trying to build something that's desktop first, forget about it. You're wasting your time. Why? Is because in October of 2016, the number of internet users that access web pages via mobile phones was higher than those that access them by computers. Build for a mobile-enabled world. Hyperconnectivity. In 1999, 80 billion photos were taken and developed. And in 2016, 1.2 trillion photos were taken and shared on social media. But the thing I love about this is that the forecast is obviously it's going to continue to grow, but the most disruptive piece will be the actual digital camera themselves only represents 10% of the market. Look at where all the usage is. All of the usage is in mobile. Sensors, Internet of Things, 50 billion devices and trillions of sensors creating this massive amount of streaming data. And it won't be the simple ones that we already know today. Fitbit, smartwatch, all those things, they're easy. They were yesterday. They are so 2 years ago. Here's where we are today. This is Google. Google have developed a contact lens that is capable of measuring your blood glucose in your eye. So you'll be able to do that without having to do it the way we do it today. Fitbit have also just announced last week that the new Fitbit that will be available next year will also do blood glucose monitoring. You'll inject a little device under the skin and your watch will monitor your blood glucose in real time. These are not technologies that are coming. These are technologies that are here right now, today. AI, massively disruptive. Now, pop culture references are my favourite. And the one thing I love about living in the area that we're in today is ultimately all these things that I used to think were fantasy are now true. And we've got them because in Siri as an early AI, but you can buy these and use them. I've got Google Home. Jarvis, probably still my favourite. I'd love to have one of these at home. But in all seriousness, the developments and progress in AI is massively transformational. Now, my favourite moment in all computing history is this one, and I actually want to play it for you because in 2011, IBM had developed Watson as a supercomputer with artificial intelligence capability. One of the big challenges in AI is context. Context in computing is massively complicated. And the thing about Jeopardy, if you've ever watched Jeopardy played, you're not asking a question and looking for an answer. You're giving an answer and trying to get the context of the question. Incredibly complicated to teach a computer to be able to do that. And what the Watson team did in IBM in 2011 was have Watson compete against the two highest prize winners in all of Jeopardy's history. The highest dollar prize winner and the guy who had the most total number of wins. And I'll just play this video for you really quickly.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. What do you say we play Jeopardy? Let's get right into the Jeopardy round. These categories: a man, a plane, a canal, Erie, chicks dig me, children's book titles, My Michelle, MC5, and finally vocabulary. First position, please make a selection.
I've never said this on TV. Chicks dig me for 200, please.
Kathleen Kenyon's excavation of this city mentioned in Joshua showed the walls had been repaired 17 times. Watson.
What is Jericho?
Correct.
400, same category.
This mystery author and her archaeologist hubby dug in hopes of finding the lost Syrian city of Urkesh. Watson.
Who is Agatha Christie?
Correct.
Same category, 600.
At the Olduvai Gorge in 1959, she and hubby Lewis found a 1.75 million year old Australopithecus Boise-eyed skull. Watson.
Who is Mary Leakey?
You're right.
800, same category.
Harriet Boyd Hawes was the first woman to discover and excavate a Minoan settlement on this island. Watson.
What is Crete?
Yes.
Let's finish Chicks Dig Me.
And Mount.
So Watson went on to be the all-time highest Jeopardy winner. To teach a computer that skill is extraordinary. That is what the future of AI looks like. The reason that video is a little jumpy is that the Watson development team are sitting up in the audience there. They don't know whether Watson's going to win or not. They're filming that sitting in the audience like proud parents, cheering Watson on, hoping that they'd done enough work in a contextual programming basis to get Watson to win. Then a university professor and a PhD student created a software program on a laptop that beat the world's 4 best poker players in the US just recently. And the DeepMind Group, which is a Google-invested company, beat the Go Grand Master just recently, the most complicated game in the world. But the thing I love about the application of the Watson AI technology is that in Bondi, in March of this year, they took, in conjunction with Molescreen, they took a mirror and Watson's processing capability and scanned 800 people on the beach at Bondi. 70 of them were referred with lesions to a dermatologist that were potentially life-threatening. The application for teaching Watson healthcare and diagnostics is that it has a greater capacity to quickly diagnose than any human could ever have, because it can ingest millions and millions of images and do it in real time. And that technology is available to all of us right now. Then there's autonomous machines. Again, my favourite reference would be flying cars, this one. But I took this photo at the CES show. This was a taxi, a drone, that would hold a single passenger. And the most extraordinary thing is, yesterday in Dubai, the Dubai government confirmed that the first passenger taxis as drones have now been tested. 2-seaters, they will fly for 30 minutes. So I wouldn't suggest calling an Uber that would be any more than 30 minutes. They will fall out of the sky. Apparently they have parachutes and other things. But this technology has been deployed and tested today. What will the transport revolution mean for our cities? If you think, and I still think about this statistic all the time, if the average vehicle is only used 4% of the time and parked 96% of the time, what would be a better use of that capital that is deployed to the auto industry? What would be a better use of the capital that is deployed to car parks in cities today? What could we do with the spaces that those car parks are in? We don't need those vehicles anymore because we share them. For the next generation, most of them won't need to drive a vehicle because they drive themselves. There won't be auto insurance because the cars are connected to each other. What does it do to the insurance industry? There are some hugely disruptive changes coming, and we've only really just started to consider them. Given everyone's had a drink already, in October of last year, Otto drove 51,774 cans of Budweiser across the I-25, one side of the US to the other, without a driver in the seat. And that was a year ago. And for an Aussie company, August 25th, 2016, they delivered the first pizza in New Zealand by drone. Again, another little bit of history for me. For those of you who are Star Trek fans and would remember the tricorder, well, it was one of the first X Prizes. It was actually the second prize through Singularity University after the X Prize for the reusable rocket. And this X Prize was for $10 million, and it was for the first group of scientists that could create a device, a tricorder, that could more accurately diagnose 10 conditions than 10 certified board doctors. And the first $2.5 million has been paid out for a group that has created the tricorder. Imagine what that will do for healthcare in areas where doctors aren't available. I mean, this is genuinely the beginning of the largest disruption in healthcare as a result of mobility. I think the healthcare industry is one area. Healthcare, education, these are industries that traditionally haven't seen a lot of change, that are about to go through more change, and we will see this in our lifetime. We will see the ability to be able to access the greatest minds, to access artificial intelligence capability for not only diagnosing conditions, being able to access the most accurate diagnostician in the world for whatever condition that you have, not having to rely on whoever it is that happens to be the locally provided physician to you. And then you've got guys like Anthony Atala printing livers, and they're already installing these and testing this technology. 3D printing for healthcare is massively disruptive. But this year, there have been a number of other changes in 3D printing, not just healthcare, but China are printing houses for $5,000. $5,000, print your own house, build it, deploy it. Synthetic biology. In 2001, Craig Venter sequenced the human genome. Massive breakthrough. Cost $100 million and took 9 months. And today, we can sequence the genome in less than 2 hours, and it costs less than $1,000. But the top line is Moore's law. Price performance doubling of integrated circuits has been massively disruptive, but look at how quickly the change has been in how we sequence DNA. And then if you haven't seen what's going on in CRISPR-Cas9, the software code of the human condition, being able to change our own software code and what that will do. Then there's augmented or mixed reality, virtual reality. So I took that video last year in the US, and that's a consumer application, but imagine what they're doing with that technology in training troops for deployment in areas. I mean, the application of these technologies is extraordinary when you think about how far we can go. Renewable energy is a huge area that I have a massive passion in. We have a lot of land in Australia, and this is one place for sure. And the price curve, when we first deployed our first large-scale solar array, the cost per megawatt was about $2.4 million. And today we can produce and deploy a megawatt of solar for under $1.2 million per megawatt. And that is going to continue to come down because the technology in PV cells continues to improve. And not only does the technology itself improve, but the ability to integrate it into consumer technologies and make it look like it should exist in our homes. And then the battery technology. We're making a disorderly transition to a renewable economy is the way to describe the political impasse that we've come to at the moment in this country. However, we will get there. And when we get there, it will be a very, very important moment in history for us, because moving away from coal and moving to renewables where the industry essentially, the key input cost for driving energy is free. Think about that for a moment. We're going to be able to decide how we use that power and when we use it. So one of the biggest changes to come is the transition to what renewables will mean. The idea that we dig things out of the ground, incredibly inefficient, and then we produce all of these other costs associated with them, that all goes away because the key input ultimately, sunlight, is free, or wind. So data and platforms, Kate talked about the platform items earlier, but just think about these for a moment. The average internet user will create, by 2020, years, 1.5 gig. The first iPhone 10 years ago only held a gig. We now create more data than that every day. So the platform, if I think about the platform in an old world context, think of a Westfield shopping centre. And when I talk to investors about what we do as a company, essentially building the infrastructure that supports the transition to the digital economy, big shopping centre, a couple of big anchor tenants, hundreds of specialty stores, and you go to one place to get all of your needs serviced. But in the digital platform, what makes all these organisations so extraordinary is they've been able to build a platform that other companies build on. The thing I love about it, Uber and Airbnb, is that essentially they have an own no IT. Everything they built was built on a platform. My key message here is that platforms are massively important, but you don't have to be the platform. You can use the platform. Uber built a $50 billion business on someone else's platform. Airbnb, if you don't know the Brian Chesky story, the three designers, San Francisco, can barely make ends meet, rent out a Lilo in their lounge room to people who are going to a design conference. And they went around to hundreds of investors trying to convince them to give them money for this idea. And they went, the only person that wants to rent a Lilo in your lounge room is an axe murderer. That idea is never going to take off. And as it turns out, Airbnb is a thing. So not only is the platform available, one of the stories that I really love is Matt Rockman, who was one of the founders of Seek with Paul Bassett. Matt tells a story about how when they started the company, they had to spend tens of millions of dollars buying the technology and proving essentially that the business model could work. But now as an investor with Paul in Square Peg, they can fund a company with $5,000 on a credit card and fail fast. The Lean Startup, if you haven't read Eric Ries's book, the Lean Startup is the Bible for how to get a company out of the ground and fail fast. And that concept of being able to iterate quickly, test a model, and then move to the next one is massively important when you think about the core of innovation today. So ultimately, business agility from an innovation point of view is what we're searching for. You don't have to be the platform, you can use the platform, but geez, if you can build the platform, you've built the next Facebook. Think about those businesses. Uber, the largest transport company in the world, doesn't own any cars, doesn't employ any drivers. Facebook, the biggest media company in the world, doesn't create any content. Airbnb, the biggest hotel chain in the world, doesn't own any hotels. If you can build the platform, that's great. But you don't have to build a platform to be massively innovative and hugely disruptive. Because Uber and Airbnb and all of those other companies have built something incredibly disruptive, a $50 billion company, on someone else's platform. So I'll leave you with a couple of thoughts. You haven't seen anything yet. What is going to happen ultimately in the next decade, and it's going to happen in our lifetime, will be the most transformative thing that has ever happened in the history of humankind. A huge opportunity is that we've got all of this data, and even today, if it's the amount of data that we create is doubling every 2 years, but less than 0.5% of it has actually ever been analysed by anyone today. Imagine what will happen when we start to make sense of the information that we have available to us. So we haven't seen 1% of the change. that ultimately is going to happen in the next decade. And it's extraordinary. We're living in the most amazing time. Innovation, ultimately, when I think about what it's taken for us to build a great company, has been core to our DNA. And I think about what it is that we can do to disrupt our business model. So the challenge I give my team all the time is, what would we do if our competitor gave our core business away for free? What is it that we would now do differently? And that's ultimately the way we have to continue to think if we're going to survive. The last thing is, these are a handful, and I'll give you 50, but these are a handful of my favourite books on what it is, A, to build a great company, or B, the way I like to think about innovation. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks.